Supportables, it was week 12, but before we get going, I should address the elephant, or I should say the elephant with a mustache in the room. Yes, I participated in November this year, and I'm extremely excited for the weekend when I can get rid of this. But since I did it, I probably should just throw the shout out, because this is what I've been saying to students all week. Make sure you're getting yourself checked out. Make sure if there's an itch, you're not just scratching it, but making sure you get a professional to scratch it first, and not just Paul at a party. Go and get things taken a look at. That's what essentially this is all supposed to be about, or that's what I'm told, so I can look ridiculous. Or is it weird that people don't really know if I'm trying to pull it off or not? Anyway, it'll be gone in a couple days, so you don't have to deal with it too much. It's one of the only times of the year Jackie's super pumped that she's not necessarily with me. Actually, enough about my mustache and everything else, because there's way more important things to talk about. Week 12 was a doozy, and it definitely had a kick for our leagues. We did eventually have a second team qualify for the playoffs officially, so I'm going to stop talking about me, my mustache, and everything else, and let's just focus on the NFL. One would think, considering when I'm recording this, editing this, and you might be watching it, I could steal the Thanksgiving and talk about what I'm thankful or not thankful for. I guess maybe because I'm looking at myself right now, I don't know if I will be as thankful as I will be on Saturday and Sunday when I can actually shave. But also, I don't know if I'm super thankful for week 12. It was our first of two non-consecutive Buyapaloozas where 6 teams sat out because the NFL hates us and doesn't want us to play fantasy, apparently. But the games weren't necessarily great. I'll call them old school, which doesn't mean that old school football stunk. And this weekend didn't stink. There was a few performances, but just some of the trends. I mean, when I think old school, I remember growing up being told that you play your division twice and you're probably going to lose your home or lose away, win home, split, and then see how you do. That was kind of this week, and except for Miami, New England, most of the divisional games were actually either kind of close or kind of important. So even if it was the 10-pointers like Denver and Vegas, or Seattle upsetting Arizona, you either kind of had the game that you didn't expect or slightly closer than you thought you'd expect. And I think you look at Tennessee, Houston, that's a good example. We had the Snow Bowl with Cleveland upsetting Pittsburgh. We had the OT with Minnesota and the Bears. But obviously the game that kind of highlighted this was Washington just putting up a stinker with Dallas. And if you actually watch that game and not just the end, it wasn't awesome, and especially if you had Daniels or McLaurin, they did nothing until the end. Daniels a little bit earlier, but if it wasn't for that 80-plus yarder with just horrendous Swiss cheese Dallas defense, those guys would not have been on the scoreboard. And then, of course, we get the folly of the missed extra point and then the return touchdown, and things go crazy. So it was entertaining, but I wouldn't necessarily say that was great. I think also when I think of old school in this week, I'm thinking of the running backs, and it's probably a trend I'm not going to speak too much on right now because it will likely be something I mention at the end when I do kind of the big recap. But the wide receivers that were supposed to be super consistent just haven't been, and knock on everything, most running backs have actually stayed healthy this year. Even the ones at the beginning, all the fantasy experts were telling you, stay away from Henry and Jacobs and Barkley, and you can try not to laugh as I'm saying that for a week like this. 7 different running backs had over 20 carries, and that is old school. Even in the Snow Bowl, as I mentioned with Cleveland, Chum didn't have a lot of yards, but he did have 2 touchdowns. And of course, Barkley looks like the league MVP if they actually gave it to MVPs and not just best quarterback with 300 plus. But there's a ton there that aren't slouches and are actually getting us more points than they were supposed to, as opposed to the wide receivers, which are not really doing so well. I think this also kind of makes me think that we are in a weird spot where we only have a couple weeks left. And so I'm going to save my every pick matters because you're going to hear it 5 or 6 times when I go over the league results. But I also think it's important for us to know what teams might be thinking. You can't really blame a team for maybe even starting to tank at this point. Look at the Giants this year. Last year, they put in Tommy DeVito. They should have lost a bunch of games. Instead, they beat Carolina, New England, and the Washington C-Words. All 3 of them jumped ahead. Remember, Carolina pick, actually Chicago pick. Those 3 picks end up being franchise potential quarterbacks. Whereas the Giants go a different route, it doesn't look like they're taking themselves seriously. Barkley leaves for, I think they're going to get a 5th or maybe a 6th round pick. And if that makes you a little upset, look what McCaffrey got not that long ago. Barkley's not necessarily McCaffrey, but he's one of the best in the game and probably should be going for more than a 5 or a 6. Then this year, they're underperforming, or actually probably adequately performing. Danny Dimes gets dumped, and now they're in another rebuild when they could have really rushed it last year, and they had more quarterbacks. Even if they didn't get top 3, they technically passed on a few other quarterbacks who are looking pretty decent. So as upset as we can get in fantasy, you really have to watch and see, is the team that I'm in, are they all in this week? It's really tough. You can't really tank in football, but you can certainly take people out a little bit earlier. So just an FYI, don't get too upset because we're in for a couple weeks where in most of these leagues, it is going to come down to that start and sit decision. Speaking of this week, I really do want to get ahead of myself because it's an exciting one. We have 3 Thanksgiving games, a Black Friday game, and then the rest of the week. Like I said, everything's going to be pretty electric, but let's put a pause on that because we are not ready to talk about week 13 yet. We haven't even talked about week 12 yet. So let's get to that and our personal league scores. Not sure whether to say congrats on the top score, Hale and Vincent, or sucks, Jackie, because you were the 3rd highest score of the week. You played one of the 2 teams you couldn't play to get the win. So 4th and Conquer, monster win, putting you up into 3rd spot or keeping you essentially solidified in that top 3. We'll get to the standings. Jackie, it was a costly one because actually I think, I will double check it, but you would have been right at that playoff spot at number 6 had you been able to squeak this one out. Now, how'd you squeak it out? There, 4th and Conquer. Tua was your quarterback 2 on the week. You did have probably not the running back you thought to have a running back 3 performance. Flip them and Henry, and that's probably what you were looking at. But actually what ended up there's a few things here that could have shifted things either way. Like I said, if you were watching the game, McLovin only had a small amount of yards until that 86-yard touchdown. That's more than enough points to make up the difference. So that one play essentially sprung you forward. He was wide receiver 5 just because of it. Your bench, not a whole lot on the go here. Now, Jackie, you've already probably noticed the only person in the top 5 was on your bench in the wide receiver 4. And had he been put in, that would have been enough as well. So 2 things kind of costed here. But overall, you didn't have a lot of people in the top 5. You just had people who all scored well, except for your flex and your receiver there. So not a whole lot to feel bummed about, and it certainly helps your total points, but you need that win at this stage, Jackie, so you really can't do anything else but win out on the way here. 4th and Conquer, you're looking pretty. I think a win probably cements you a playoff spot. We'll get to that later, but a lot of stuff would have to happen for you to get knocked out of the top 6. The only other team Jackie couldn't have bumped into and taken the win was our Raw Doggers. They did kind of roll on ball too well. Randy had an uncharacteristic low week. Now, if you look, it didn't really cost either one of them their spots. They're still both top 4, so I don't think they're too bummed about the whole situation. Randy, unfortunately for you, I mean, you did have our quarterback 1 in Daniels, and like I said, that was kind of all at the last minute. Not as much as McLovin, but still a fair bit. You did have Chubb with the 2 touchdowns. Now, he didn't squeak into our top 5. I did mention it was a very running back heavy week, and you certainly had some performances. You just needed a lot more. Jonnu Smith might have helped you out. He was our tight end 3. Him alone wouldn't be enough, and I think we can see why you had the down week here. Now, granted, you don't tend to start 2 of these, or all 3 of these, but you certainly start 2 of them, and Chase is kind of your big gun, so unfortunately for you, that didn't really work out. And obviously, getting a bagel at Quentin Johnson, I thought it was a good reach. Baltimore does like to give up the deep ball, but Johnson couldn't hang on to the ball to save his life. I am not making a weird reference there. He just couldn't catch. On the flip side of the coin, we had our defense 5 in Green Bay. We had the only of the top 5 kickers. He was only a kicker 3, but no one else had a kicker on the top 5. That is in our Dicker the Kicker. In him we trust. And you did have Jacobs, who I'd mentioned before, who had a monster week, putting him at the RB2, which was more than enough to put you on top. Same. I don't think you've technically clinched, but we're getting to that spot. Randy, Jake, Paul, you guys are all fine. You just need to make sure, I think one more win probably cements it all, or you just need to hope that a bunch of us just start losing in the last 2 weeks. Typically, losses at this part really do cost you, but as we're going to see with the standings, Kelsey, you managed to hang on even though you took a tough beat from Pamela. Now, I think a little bit ago, Pamela, I told you pretty much had to win out to make sure that you went all the way here and gave yourself a shot at the playoffs. You took me seriously. I think you still technically have a shot, so well done here. Now, we can go and pick ahead and say, well, you had this, you had that. Let's be honest, you had 51 points from Saquon Barkley, and this happening so late and on a Monday or on the night game was pretty epic, where we all can just kind of watch and see what happened. This was a bit of a miracle at the end. Now, weirdly enough, Kelsey, you probably had a more balanced team. You had the QB3 in Caleb. You had the running back 4 in Gibbs. You did have maybe a decision that also kind of cost you. If we take a look at the bench, had you put Waddle in for Watson, that would have been enough to put you over top, I think. So unfortunate there, but I mean, anytime you go up against someone who puts up a 50 in one player, it's an uphill battle. But like I said, Kelsey, things could have been worse. You're still technically in the top 6, although I wouldn't lose again and expect that to be the case. But Emily, I said it before, you have to keep winning out to give yourself a shot. And so far, so good. Let's see if you can keep rolling next week. They say you got to be good to be lucky and lucky to be good, but that's essentially what we looked at here with our leaders. They didn't need the win, but they took it anyway, and it really did end up costing Raph and James on this one. Now, this was our tightest matchup by far, as I think we can see, and a 133. You wouldn't have beaten a lot of other teams. Now, certainly Raph and James put up a fight, but the 133 was a nice matchup for you. You still take our 11th win. Now you're just spiking the ball. You did have Lamar with our quarterback 5 spot, and your tight end Kittle was our tight end 4. Aside from that, just kind of a good sampling. I mean, Houston's defense was quite important. And I think just in general, I mean, they were our defense 3 and having some fairly standard performances, but definitely a down from your particular standards. Raph and James, you did put up a fight. You had the quarterback 5 in Mahomes, or 4, sorry. It was the running back 5 in Pollard. You just needed a bit more love, and I hate to say it, but if we look down on your bench, you did have some possibilities here in Jackson Smith and Jigba. Chuba Hubbard might have been a nice one. If it was over Stevenson, that would have been a call that some people might have thought you could have made. And any kind of pick when it comes down to 4.1 points, obviously things could have been slightly different. You did take the loss. You are out of the top 6, but obviously we have 2 weeks left. And Malakovs, you can probably take the week off if you want. Actually, next week I double dog dare you. Just put all your players on the bench just to show us all that you don't need the win. I dare you. Our last matchup, I needed the win, and I put up a better than average fight here. I'm right in the middle, and so I certainly was lucky to, unfortunately for our defending champions, you'd lasted this long, and at the 10th spot for me to save this for the first time is actually pretty fantastic. You are our lowest score, so I was pretty lucky to bump into you on this week. You do owe rounds for week 12. But like I said, you went pretty far being in the bottom spot and not having to pay, so there's something to be said for that. Now, you did have one of our unfortunate situations. If we look down, you did have some people on benches or just straight up hurt. That's why you had the good fella and Tommy DeVito as your only quarterback, and ask the Giants, you don't want them or him as your only quarterback at any point in time. You also had a wide receiver 2 in Sutton, so hey, there's something there, and I think actually that's a pretty good find. He seems to be Bo Nix's buddy. For me, I didn't have a phenomenal one, like I said, but just a lot of people scoring just at or above their average, which is what I really needed. Didn't get a lot of quarterback love, for lack of a better term, but I did get some tight end love with the tight end 2 in McBride, which was nice. I think in general, I made some good calls here. I mean, Dowdle actually, weirdly enough, should have scored a bit more if you think about it, but lost the fumble. Aside from that, though, I just needed the win. Didn't care if it was pretty or if it was ugly, but got it. I'm technically still in the playoffs now, but we know with 2 weeks left, there's no guarantees. You know, sometimes I write these things down before I do this, and sometimes I don't. I thought that maybe the Raw Doggers had clinched, but I didn't want to say it just in case and have to re-record. I'd rather do it this way and say, congratulations, Raw Doggers. The Lang household is thrilled tonight to be our only 2 currently in the playoffs. Now, obviously, they're going to be joined by a lot of people probably next week, and then obviously the week after, we all round it out. But here's where we're at. We certainly have, I'd say these 2 are fairly, I think you'd have to pretty much fall off the Titanic on this one, and everybody else below you'd have to win. But definitely I would say win, and you are certainly in. As for me, there is nothing guaranteed here because obviously with 2 weeks left, I need to win to make sure I keep that spot, and then win again to make sure I hold that spot. So I'll be watching for a number of teams to lose as much as I'm looking for me to win. We got the fight here in the household. If only one could make it, I wonder if which one is going to get on top. Or maybe, like I said, I fall and maybe they both make it in. I do think Team Kickass, I think this means you're technically out, but just because of points scored and tied. So you won last year. It looks like we're not going to have a repeat performance. Pamela, I haven't done all the math, but you are technically still in it, right? Because if you win 2, 6 wins would put you just here. So you still, I stand by my keep winning and you keep having a shot. So definitely this week, you want to know who you're playing. Your matchups are going to mean anything or everything. And maybe my baiting Jules and Lara makes a little more sense now for me. I think if we look, though, last week we did have a lot of kind of these mixed matchups. Our only real kind of top spot, Randy looks like she's getting a tough draw. She seems to be playing nothing but the top 2 or 3. So definitely one of you will clinch. The other one might by mathematics, but we will have another 8-win team for sure. And I'd say win, and you are definitely in. Also, remember, just as I go down, top 2 get a bye through the first round of the playoffs, which is really important. So just bear that in mind. I just feel like I always have to over-explain playoff things to people in this league. Speaking of Raf, you want to make sure you have a tough matchup, but you need this win. 8 versus 9, I would say winner has a shot. Loser's out of town. That's an old school WWE loser leaves town match. And then we've got here playing spoilers to our 6th spot. Can Team Kickass still rebound and show they have the fight in them against Kelsey? Lots to think about for this week. You can tell already because it's only hours before the first kickoff. It's going to be an exciting one. I alluded to it earlier, but pay attention this week, not just because every single add and drop is going to matter and every single decision might just end up mattering. We saw 2 or 3 different matchups actually could have been decided differently if it wasn't for who people had put in or on the bench. But also, if you are listening to this when I am sending it out, it is just before kickoff at Thanksgiving. It does make me think of last year and super miss all of you because if you remember, we went down and actually watched the first Thanksgiving game, or I did, and some people just talked about things around me for a bit. But most of us, I think, watched it if it was downstairs at an old British pub. So missing out on that this year. Hopefully some people are getting together. Sounds like there's a visit coming up soon, but let's put that off to the side. We got 3 Thanksgiving games on Thursday, 1 Black Friday game on Amazon, I think, and then a normal week. But there is nothing normal about a week 13. A whole lot of things are going to happen. So best of luck, everyone.